Let is the most important word in the title, not make them lose you, not the active, intentional construction of circumstances designed to produce a particular outcome in the avoidance interior, not perform losing you, not the strategic withdrawal that is still organized around the avoidance response, still monitoring the periphery for signs that the loss has registered, still fundamentally oriented toward the avoidant as the audience for the departure. Let, the passive, honest, entirely self-directed quality of someone who has arrived at the genuine release of their grip on a connection that has been costing more than it has been returning, and who, in releasing the grip, allows the natural consequence of the release to be whatever it is going to be. The letting is not a decision made about the avoidant. It is a decision made about yourself, about the life you are living, and whether the current configuration of it, the continuous, exhausting, hope-sustaining, self-diminishing orientation towards someone who has not been adequately meeting the orientation, is the configuration you are choosing to continue. The letting is the choice for yourself. The loss that the letting produces in the avoidant is a consequence of the choice, not its purpose. This distinction is the entire difference between the letting that actually serves you and the performed version of it that does not. Most people who arrive at the concept of letting the avoidant lose them arrive at it from the wrong direction. They arrive from the direction of the avoidant, from the calculation of what the loss will produce in the avoidance interior, what movements it will generate, whether the loss will be sufficient to produce the change that the presence was unable to produce. The letting is framed, even when it is framed in the language of self-care and moving on, as a thing that will happen to the avoidant and will produce in the avoidant a specific response that the person doing the letting is, however quietly, still hoping for. This is not letting. This is a more sophisticated form of the same orientation that has been generating the dynamic throughout. It is the doing of the previous piece, dressed in the language of not doing. It is the reaching, dressed in the costume of releasing. And the avoidance monitoring system, which reads the orientation rather than the presentation, feels the reaching beneath the releasing with the same accuracy it brings to every other form of intimacy pressure, dressed in alternative clothing. The genuine letting requires the genuine release of the outcome as the point, the genuine arrival at the understanding that what happens in the avoidance interior as a consequence of the loss is not your responsibility, not your project, and not, this is the hardest part to fully mean, the thing you are doing this for. You are doing this for yourself. For the part of yourself that has been shrinking inside the hoping. For the version of your life that has been on hold while the majority of your relational energy was directed at someone who was not reciprocating adequately. For the becoming that was always the more important project, and that has been waiting with the patient reliability of all genuinely important things on the other side of the release. What does the genuine letting look like in practice? Not the dramatic departure, not the announced ending that gives the avoidant the specific emotional event of your leaving as a clear, registered, response-inviting moment. The avoidance system, encountering a dramatic departure, has a response protocol for it. The management of the specific event of losing you, the processing of the loss as a discrete, bounded, narrative accommodatable event, the reorganization of the interior around the fact of the ending as something that happened, that was processed, that the self-sufficiency narrative can absorb and move past with its fundamental claims intact. The genuine letting is not a dramatic event for the avoidant to process. It is a gradual, quiet, entirely honest reorientation of where your energy goes. The continuous, unannounced, not performed for any one redirection of attention away from the avoidant and toward the life. The daily, private, non-strategic choice of your own becoming over the maintaining of the hoping. The slow, authentic, self-directed process of a person who is no longer organizing their interior around someone else's availability. This is not a silence designed to produce a response. It is not a withdrawal calibrated to register as loss. It is simply the natural consequence of someone who has, through honest internal reckoning with the cost of the current configuration, decided to fully inhabit their own life. The avoidance experience of the loss is the byproduct of your return to yourself, not the purpose, the byproduct. The avoidant losing you, in the genuine rather than performed sense, produces something in the avoidant that no amount of expressed need or strategic withdrawal or demonstrated change has ever produced. It produces the confrontation with the irreversibility. Previous losses, the ones that occurred through the ordinary operation of the dynamic, through the eventual departure of people who could no longer sustain the pattern's costs, were processed within the narrative frameworks that the avoidance management system makes available. The relationship ran its course. The timing was not right. The incompatibility was genuine. The loss was unfortunate but ultimately understandable. Within the terms of the story, the avoidant was telling about what happened and why. The loss produced by the genuine letting is different. Because the genuine letting is not ambiguous, it does not produce a clean narrative accommodation. It is not the loss of someone who was hurt enough to leave. It is the loss of someone who valued themselves enough to stop. The distinction is everything. The hurt enough to leave narrative positions the leaving as the other person's response to something, which means the leaving is, in the narrative, about the avoidance behavior, which means, within the narrative, the avoidant occupies the position of someone whose behavior was too much for the other person to sustain. The valued themselves enough to stop narrative positions, the leaving differently. It is not about the avoidance behavior. It is about the other person's relationship with their own worth. The leaving is not a verdict on what the avoidant did. It is a statement about what the leaving person requires, about the standard they hold for their own life, about the version of connection they are no longer willing to accept as sufficient when they know, because they have experienced it in the better moments of the connection, because their own depth makes them capable of recognizing it, what genuine connection actually feels like, and what the current configuration is not providing. This narrative does not give the avoidant a clear role, does not position the avoidant as the agent of the leaving, does not provide the self-protective accommodation of being the person whose behavior was too much. It simply positions the leaving person as someone who chose a different life, a fuller life, a life that the current configuration of the connection was preventing from being fully lived. The avoidant, standing in the aftermath of this kind of loss, has no available narrative that makes the loss feel like something other than what it is, the departure of someone who had enough self-respect to leave. And the departure of someone who had enough self-respect to leave is the most genuinely humbling loss the avoidant will ever experience. Not because it is punishing, because it is honest, because it reflects, with a clarity that no amount of expressed hurt or strategic withdrawal or demonstrated change can produce, the exact cost of what the pattern has been. You have been holding on to the connection, to the hoping, to the version of things that could be if the avoidant finally found the capacity the relationship always required. The holding has been exhausting in the specific way of holding something that is not holding back, the asymmetrical exhaustion of someone whose grip is the only thing keeping the connection from dissolving. Let go of the grip, not with anger, not with the announcement of the letting go, not with the performed indifference of someone who is demonstrating their release while still watching for the response, with the quiet, honest, entirely self-directed quality of someone who has arrived through the genuine internal reckoning with what the holding has cost, at the understanding that the grip was never their responsibility to maintain. The connection required two grips to be a connection. It has been sustained by one, and the one grip, however strong and however generously maintained, is not sufficient for what a genuine connection is not sufficient for the life you deserve to be living, is not sufficient for the version of yourself that has been waiting on the other side of the release to be fully inhabited. Let go. Let the avoidant lose you in the specific, irreversible, honest way of someone who was not taken, but who simply, finally chose themselves. And in the choosing, in the specific, dignified, self-respecting quality of someone who released what was not adequately meeting them without drama and without performance, and without the orientation toward the avoidance response that would have made the release another form of reaching. Discover what has been waiting, the life. Entirely, finally, without apology or diminishment or the continuous background occupation of hoping for someone who was not fully arriving, yours, more than the connection ever was, more than the hoping ever promised, genuinely, completely, irreversibly yours.